The glass walls of the tower shimmered like they were made of gold. The city was still waking up, but up here, 40 floors above the street, the morning already belonged to the powerful. You could hear it in their laughter, you could see it in their suits, and you could feel it in the way they didn't look at the people who made the place shine. Ruth pushed her cart across the marble floor, the wheels humming against the silence that came between bursts of expensive talk. Her uniform was crisp, her hands gloved, her back straight. She had done this for 12 years. 12 years of the same corridors, the same framed awards, the same voices echoing through glass and pride. They called her the cleaning lady, like it was her name. They never called her Ruth. This morning she arrived earlier than usual. The light hit her face as she stood in front of the CEO's office, Vincent Harlan, the man everyone in the building spoke about like a god. Ruth knew his footsteps by sound, the sharp click of Italian leather, the pause before the door opened, the scent of his cologne that lingered long after he left. She moved quietly inside, wiping down the shelf where his trophies sat: top innovator, CEO of the year, business titan of 2023. Each award gleamed like it demanded admiration. As she dusted, her hand brushed against a framed photo, Vincent smiling beside a row of investors. Every face in that picture looked powerful, every one of them white. The elevator chimed behind her. Vincent walked in mid-conversation with his assistant, his voice crisp and commanding. "The meeting at 10, he said, "and make sure the cleaning staff are gone before they arrive." The words hit Ruth harder than usual, not because they were new, but because he said them like she wasn't even there, like she was furniture. She lowered her eyes and whispered, "Yes, sir," though he never asked her anything. Vincent didn't glance at her, didn't even pause. He just brushed past, his suit sleeve grazing her arm as if she were air. Ruth turned away, staring at her own reflection in the glass wall. For a second, she imagined saying something, telling him that she was more than a uniform, more than the silence he mistook for obedience. But she didn't. Instead, she took her cart, pressed the elevator button, and left, her reflection shrinking in the mirrored doors until it disappeared. Hours passed. The office buzzed with nervous energy. Assistants hurried down hallways with coffee and papers, whispering about the new investor. No one knew her name, but everyone knew this deal would make or break the company. Vincent Harlan stood at the window, adjusting his tie, practicing his smile in the glass. "She's supposed to be a powerhouse," he muttered. "Let's make sure she sees what kind of operation we run." By 10 o'clock, the boardroom gleamed. Fresh flowers, polished silver carafes, everything perfect. Vincent stood at the head of the table, confidence radiating like cologne. Around him, the board members murmured, waiting for the door to open. Then, silence. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. Every head turned, and Vincent froze mid-step. The woman walking in wasn't what he expected. She didn't carry a briefcase of intimidation. She carried calm, power that didn't need to shout. Her heels clicked against the floor, the same rhythm Ruth's cart once made, only now it echoed louder. For a moment, Vincent's brain refused to process what his eyes saw. The woman standing at the head of the table, the investor he'd been waiting for, was the same woman who had been dusting his shelf that morning. Ruth. But this Ruth wasn't wearing her uniform. She wore a sleek charcoal suit. Her hair was pinned back. No gloves, no cart, just presence. And in her hand not a mop, but a pen. The room held its breath. Vincent's smile faltered, his rehearsed lines vanishing into the air. I'm sorry," he stammered. "There must be some mistake." Ruth smiled, not cruelly, but with the quiet knowing of someone who had waited a long time for this moment. "No mistake, Mr. Harlan," she said softly. "My name is Ruth Davenport, founder of Davenport Holdings. We recently acquired 40% of your company." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Vincent's face drained of color. His assistant blinked, lost between disbelief and apology. Ruth walked slowly to the head of the table, every step deliberate, controlled, graceful. Vincent tried to recover his composure, clearing his throat. Of course, yes, I've read about your work in community ventures. Very impressive. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Ruth took her seat, folding her hands on the table. You've read the headlines, she said, but you didn't see the floors I cleaned while building it. Silence. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Vincent shifted in his chair. You claimed. For 12 years, Ruth said, her tone steady, almost kind. This building, your office. Every morning at 5, I saw the faces of men who never saw me. I learned more about business from your hallway conversations than I ever did in school. And I built something from that knowledge, something that doesn't forget people like me. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Vincent forced a laugh. Well, that's quite inspiring, but today's meeting is about partnership, isn't it? Ruth nodded. It is, she said, but not the kind you're used to. I didn't invest in this company for profit. I invested for change. The janitorial staff you ignore, they'll now have health care. The cafeteria workers will have paid leave. And from now on, every employee, no matter their title, will be treated like they belong here. Her words cut through the air like light through glass. Vincent's jaw tightened. That's ambitious, he said. It's necessary, Ruth replied, because a company that forgets its people forgets its soul. She signed the contract in front of them all. The pen glided across the page like it had been waiting for this. Vincent sat motionless, his empire shrinking in his eyes. He looked at Ruth, really looked, maybe for the first time. The woman he'd dismissed as invisible now sat above him, rewriting the rules he'd built his pride on. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ruth stood, gathered her papers, and said quietly, "See you around the office, Mr. Harlan." She turned and walked out, her reflections stretching across the glass walls that once erased her. This time, it didn't fade, it glowed. The boardroom stayed silent long after she left. Vincent finally exhaled, the weight of 12 years of arrogance pressing down on him. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked, not from anger, but from awakening. That day, the staff whispered her name in the hallways. Ruth, the woman who used to clean the floors, now owned them. And for the first time in a long while, the tower didn't feel so cold. Vincent's throat went dry. His smile, the one he had rehearsed for days, faltered beneath the weight of recognition. "You must be Mrs. Reynolds," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle hollow. His hand twitched toward his tie, adjusting it for the third time in a minute. The room seemed to tilt around him, faces watching, waiting, sensing something shifting in the air. Ruth smiled, slow and steady, the kind of smile that carried history behind it. "Ruth Reynolds," she said softly, "founder of the Reynolds Family Trust." The name rolled through the boardroom like thunder trapped under glass. People straightened in their seats. Pens stopped tapping. Even the air conditioning hummed quieter, as if the building itself was listening. Everyone in that room knew the name. The Reynolds Family Trust wasn't just money, it was influence, legacy, respect. It had funded housing projects, small businesses, women's education programs across 3 states. It was the kind of foundation people whispered about, a powerful but never flashy. And it all belonged to the woman Vincent had told to make sure the cleaning staff are gone before they arrive. He blinked, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Of course, we're honored to have you here, Mrs. Reynolds. Please have a seat." Ruth sat gracefully, every motion deliberate. She didn't rush, didn't fidget. Power wasn't loud, it was calm. And in that calm, Vincent could feel his own authority starting to crumble. He launched into his presentation with forced enthusiasm, clicking through slides, his voice rising and falling in practiced confidence. "As you can see, our quarterly projections are steady. With your foundation's partnership, we can expand operations into new territories. It's a win-win," he said, glancing her way for approval. But Ruth wasn't nodding. She was studying him, the way his hands moved, the way he avoided eye contact when he spoke of partnership. It wasn't collaboration he sought, it was control. She could feel it in every word. When she finally spoke, her voice carried warmth and patience. "Mr. Harlan, I admire your vision," she said, "but tell me, how do you define growth?" Vincent chuckled lightly, as though the question was simple. "Growth, well, profit of course, expansion, market capture." Ruth leaned forward slightly, her eyes gentle but unwavering. "Profit," she repeated, "and people." He hesitated. "Well, people are part of the process, naturally." "Part of the process," Ruth echoed, "or the purpose?" The question hung in the air. Vincent forced another smile, waving his hand. "Mrs. Reynolds, we all care about people, but this is business. Emotions can't drive decisions." Ruth's lips curved just enough to suggest she'd heard that line before. "That's interesting," she said, "because emotions, compassion, respect, humanity built my business. Without them, I'd still be scrubbing floors in yours." A murmur rippled across the table. Vincent's face reddened. I didn't mean." But Ruth held up a hand, stopping him with grace. "It's all right," she said. "Old habits die hard." He nodded quickly, trying to recover. "Of course, you're absolutely right." But even as he said it, he couldn't stop himself. Every time Ruth explained a detail of her plan, microloans for low-income women, community-based housing developments, employee equity initiatives, Vincent found a way to interrupt. "That's admirable but unrealistic. That's generous but risky. That might work in theory, but—" Each time, Ruth simply nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The more he spoke, the more the board saw what she already knew: arrogance was a disease that spoke for itself. As the presentation dragged on, Vincent's tone grew sharper, his ego bruised by her calm. "Mrs. Reynolds, perhaps philanthropy clouds your view of corporate reality," he said. "Here we deal in results, not sentiments." Ruth smiled again, that same patient smile that didn't bend. "I understand," she said softly. "Results are everything. Tell me, Mr. Harlan, how have your results been lately?" The question hit its mark. His jaw tightened. Everyone in the room knew the company's financial reports. Revenues had fallen. Investors were restless. Ruth's foundation wasn't just another client, it was his last lifeline. Vincent cleared his throat, changing slides, talking faster now. "Let's move forward," he said. "Hear what we are proposing." But his voice was shaking. Confidence couldn't mask desperation anymore. Ruth sat back, silent, letting him speak himself into a corner. She learned long ago that silence could be louder than shouting. When he finally ran out of words, the room sat in uneasy quiet. Ruth looked around: the polished table, the sleek walls, the framed success stories on the wall. Her reflections stared back from the glass, and for a moment she saw the woman she used to be. The one who once mopped these floors while men like Vincent walked past her as though she were invisible. She stood slowly. The chair's legs scraped softly against the floor, breaking the silence like a bell. "I used to clean this floor," she said quietly. Heads turned. "Every morning," she continued, her voice even steady, "I prayed that the people up here would notice the ones down there." Her eyes met Vincent's. "Seems I was praying for myself." No one spoke. Even the hum of the air system seemed to fade. Vincent's lips parted, but no words came. His hands were trembling on the table. He couldn't look at her. Not now. Not after all the times he'd walked past her without seeing her face. Ruth looked around the room, not with anger, but with compassion. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," she said softly. "I'm here to remind you what business really is. It's not the numbers on that screen. It's the people who make those numbers possible. The janitor who opens your doors before sunrise. The receptionist who stays late after everyone's gone. The woman who cleans your floor so your shoes can shine. They're not beneath you. They're the foundation holding you up." She took a breath, her eyes glistening, but her voice never broke. "And if a business forgets that, if a leader forgets that, then no amount of profit will ever make it whole." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent, like something sacred had just been spoken aloud. Vincent sat frozen, his eyes on the table, the reflection of his own shame staring back at him. He'd spent his whole career chasing power, only to realize that the most powerful person in the room was the one he'd once ignored. Ruth reached into her bag, slid a single sheet of paper onto the table. "This is our partnership proposal," she said. "We'll fund your expansion, but under new conditions. Fair wages, community investment, diversity in leadership. You'll build not just wealth, but worth." She turned to leave, then paused, looking over her shoulder. "The question isn't whether you can afford it," she said. "It's whether you can afford not to." And with that, she walked out, calm, certain, radiant in her quiet triumph. Behind her, the boardroom remained silent. The men who once filled the air with noise and certainty now sat speechless, their reflections flickering in the glass walls like ghosts of arrogance past. Vincent stared at the door she'd just walked through, his heart pounding. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small, but also human. That's the thing about dignity. You can try to bury it under titles, money, and glass ceilings. But one day, it walks back through your door, dressed in grace, holding the pen. The car door opened, and Vincent stepped out into a part of the city he hadn't visited in years. The air felt different here, thicker, heavier, alive. He remembered this place only as a blur of news reports and business maps labeled high-risk zones. Once he'd called it a lost cause. Now, standing before the gleaming glass structure rising from its heart, he realized how wrong he'd been. The building caught the morning sun like a mirror of second chances, the Reynolds Community Center. Ruth's name wasn't on it, but her presence lived in every inch of it. Inside, laughter echoed, the kind that doesn't belong in boardrooms, but carries more power than any quarterly report. Children ran across polished marble floors, their sneakers squeaking like tiny trumpets of joy. Women sat in circles, learning business plans, writing dreams into notebooks. Every wall bore the marks of progress, photos of families, students, workers, all tied together by one woman's quiet determination. Ruth walked beside him, calm and unhurried. Her heels clicked softly, steady against the sound of life all around. "This used to be a warehouse," she said. "Abandoned, flooded every winter. Nobody cared enough to fix it." Her eyes softened as she watched a little girl hug a volunteer. "Now it's where people start over." Vincent nodded, still uneasy. He had expected a tour, numbers, projections, maybe a pitch. But this felt different. He wasn't looking at an operation, he was looking at a heartbeat. Everywhere he turned, people greeted Ruth like family, not out of fear or duty, but out of love. They smiled, touched her arm, shared small updates. "Ms. Ruth, we got approved for the loan." "Ms. Ruth, look, I passed my exam." She answered each one with warmth, never glancing at her watch, never rushing the moment. It was everything Vincent's company was not. When they reached a quiet hallway lined with glass offices, Ruth turned to him. "You look uncomfortable," she said gently. He chuckled nervously. No, I'm just taking it in." She smiled faintly. "You're not used to seeing power look like this, are you?" He hesitated, unable to answer. They stepped into a conference room, small but bright. Instead of gold accents or leather chairs, there were hand-painted murals on the walls, drawings from local children. The table was plain wood, worn but polished clean. On it lay a folder. Inside, figures, charts, projections, the kind of paperwork Vincent understood. Relief washed over him for a second. Numbers made sense. Numbers didn't judge. Ruth stood across from him, her hands resting lightly on the table. "You asked me yesterday, why me?" she said. "Because people like you forget, and I need you to remember." He looked up, puzzled. "Remember what?" "What it's like to build something that isn't just yours," she said softly. "What it feels like to give dignity, not charity. To invest where the return isn't just money, it's people standing tall again." Vincent leaned back, folding his arms. And you think I can help with that? I know you can, Ruth said, but only if you want to. He exhaled, glancing at the documents. This partnership of yours, he said, it's different from what I expected. It's not just business, Ruth replied. It's a mirror. I want you to see what you built and what you broke. He blinked, unsure how to respond. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, it was honest. Then Ruth reached into the folder and slid a single page toward him. If we're partners, you'll invest here in people, not just profits. I don't need your money, I need your change. Vincent stared at the page. The numbers were clear, sustainable funding models, returns that looked smaller than his usual ventures. But the margins weren't what caught his breath. It was the photos attached, faces of workers, single mothers, janitors, people he'd never noticed before, smiling because someone finally did. His throat tightened. You really believe this can last? He asked quietly. Ruth nodded. It already has, for years, without your help. But imagine what it could do if those who once looked down decided to lift others up. He swallowed hard. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said, but it's necessary. Through the glass walls, Vincent saw a janitor wiping down a nearby desk, a man in a faded uniform humming softly to himself. He moved with care, making sure every inch shone. Ruth looked toward him and nodded with a smile, a small human gesture of acknowledgement. The man straightened, nodded back, his eyes lighting up for a second before returning to his work. Something inside Vincent cracked, something he didn't even know had been brittle. He thought about all the times he'd walked past people like that without seeing them. He remembered how many thank yous he had left unsaid. He closed the folder slowly. I see what you're doing, he said. You're not just rebuilding this neighborhood, you're rebuilding people. Ruth tilted her head, smiling gently. No, she said. They rebuilt themselves. I just gave them the tools. That's what investment should look like. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the janitor. The man had moved to another table, still humming, still smiling. The sight hurt, not because it was sad, but because it was pure. It reminded Vincent of what he'd lost chasing what he thought mattered most. Do you ever regret it? He asked. All those years cleaning floors that weren't yours. Ruth's eyes softened. Never, she said, because every floor taught me something, how to listen, how to watch, how to lead without shouting. Sometimes, when life pushes you low, it's so you can see what others miss from up high. Her words hit deep, like a truth he hadn't earned, but needed to hear. He looked at her, really looked, and realized this wasn't about redemption for her, it was about reflection for him. For years, Vincent had built towers that touched the sky, yet somehow, he'd never built anything that touched a heart. Now, standing in a building full of laughter and hope, he felt smaller, but also lighter. He took a breath. If I sign this, he said quietly, what happens next? Ruth smiled. Then we start over, she said. Together, you'll come here, meet the people your company once ignored, learn their names, understand their worth, and maybe, just maybe, you'll remember why business should serve something bigger than itself. He nodded slowly, the weight of his own ego settling into humility. You're asking me to change how I see the world. Ruth's smile deepened. No, she said, I'm asking you to see it for the first time. Vincent lowered his pen to the paper, but his hand hesitated. He looked up one last time, at the children laughing in the hall, at the mothers learning, at the janitor still wiping the desk with quiet pride. That's when it happened. The numbers didn't move him. The numbers never did. It was that moment, that simple exchange between Ruth and the man with the rag, that broke him open. He signed. And as the ink dried, something inside him shifted, not a fall from power, but a rise into something truer. Because in that glass building, among the people he once forgot, Vincent Harlan finally remembered what it meant to be human. The press release went out like wildfire, bold letters, shining headlines, polished quotes about innovation and partnership. Harlan Industries joins forces with the Reynolds Foundation. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and the world praised the merger like it was the birth of a new era. But for Ruth, it wasn't about headlines. It wasn't about the photo ops or the handshakes. It was about what happened after the applause, when the microphones were gone, and all that was left was the work. Weeks passed, and the building felt different. The marble floors still gleamed, but now the reflection staring back carried a quieter strength. Employees whispered Ruth's name with a kind of reverence that wasn't about money, it was about meaning. The woman who once cleaned the floors now walked them as a partner, yet she didn't strut, didn't gloat. She simply moved with the same grace she always had, steady, grounded, unshaken. Vincent changed too, not all at once, not perfectly, but the edges of his pride began to soften. The man who once measured worth in numbers now found himself studying faces, the receptionist who greeted every guest with warmth, the delivery driver who always worked late, the janitor who moved quietly through the halls like a shadow of humility. These were people he had once overlooked. Now he noticed their names, their stories, their humanity. The next board meeting arrived like any other, the long table, the polished screens, the rows of expensive suits, but there was something new in the air, something invisible yet undeniable. Vincent stood at the head of the room, glancing at Ruth across the table. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone reminded him of everything that had brought him here, every mirror he'd had to face. As the meeting began, a soft knock interrupted. The janitor stepped in, rolling his cart, moving to the corner quietly to empty the trash. It was the same routine Vincent had ignored 1,000 times before. But this time, his eyes followed the man, the quiet care in his movements, the respect he gave the room even when the room never gave it back. The board members barely noticed him. They kept flipping through papers, sipping coffee, talking numbers. But Vincent couldn't look away. He remembered the way Ruth had once stood in his office, invisible yet present, and now, standing in her place, he felt the sting of recognition. He cleared his throat. "You can finish after we are done," he said softly, the old reflex slipping out before he could stop it. The janitor nodded politely and turned to leave. But then Vincent caught himself. His voice broke the rhythm of the meeting. "Actually," he said, standing, the room went still, heads turned. He looked directly at the janitor, not through him, not past him, but at him. "Actually, take your time." The words hung there, simple and small, yet heavy enough to shift the air. The janitor froze, confused, then nodded again, this time slower, with a faint smile that reached his eyes. It was a tiny moment, almost invisible, but it was everything. The board members exchanged glances, unsure what to make of it. Vincent didn't care. He sat back down, a quiet tremor in his chest. For the first time, he hadn't performed leadership, he had practiced it. Across the table, Ruth watched. Her expression was calm, almost tender. She saw what most people missed, that real change doesn't happen when a man is shamed. It happens when he's shown a mirror he can finally look into. She never wanted revenge. She wanted reflection. As the meeting went on, Vincent spoke again, but this time, his voice carried something new. Not the practiced charm of a CEO, but the rawness of a man learning to speak from somewhere honest. "Our next phase," he began, his tone uncertain but steady, "isn't just about expansion. It's about inclusion, real inclusion, the kind that starts inside our own walls." He paused, his eyes flicking briefly toward the janitor still working quietly in the corner. "We've built a company that reaches across markets, but it's time we reach across people too, not just for good optics, but because it's right." There was a slight tremor in his voice, the kind that comes when pride gives way to purpose. The board listened, unsure how to react. This wasn't the Vincent Harlan they knew, the sharp-tongued leader who cut through meetings like a storm. This was a man learning the weight of silence, the power of humility. Ruth leaned back, watching him. She didn't interrupt, didn't add to his words. She simply nodded once, slow and approving. She knew what it had cost him to say that, to unlearn the language of dominance and replace it with the language of respect. When the meeting ended, the usual rush didn't come. No chatter, no scramble for the elevator. People lingered, quiet, thoughtful. Something had shifted, small but unmistakable. Vincent gathered his notes, his hands slightly unsteady. He glanced once more toward the janitor, who was now wiping the glass wall beside the exit. The sunlight poured through, clean and sharp, and for a moment, Vincent saw himself reflected in it, not the man he used to be, but the man he was trying to become. He walked over, awkward at first, unsure how to bridge years of distance built by status. "That's a good shine," he said softly. The janitor looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Just doing my job, sir." Vincent shook his head. "It's more than a job." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "Thank you." The man blinked, startled. Slowly, he wiped his hand on his sleeve and took the gesture. Their palms met, a simple handshake between two worlds that had never touched before. When Vincent turned back, Ruth was standing at the doorway, watching. Their eyes met, and in that look, no words were needed. She saw what she had come to see, not perfection, but progress. Later, as the sun dipped low and the office lights flickered on, Vincent stood alone by the window. The city stretched out below him, endless towers, endless glass. For years, he had stared at this view and only seen success. But now, looking through that same glass, he saw something different. He saw the people who cleaned it. The fingerprints they wiped away. The care they gave to a world that never gave back. The silent dignity of those who made everything shine for others while staying unseen themselves. And for the first time, Vincent didn't just see through the glass, he saw beyond it. Because that's what change really is, not a headline, not a handshake, not a deal signed in ink. It's a moment of seeing what you used to overlook and realizing that maybe the ones you once looked down on were the ones holding you up all along.